Good morning, Ohio State fans. Welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Tuesday, September 23rd. I am joined by our film study guru, Kyle Jones. Kyle, I'm sure you're just brimming with optimism coming out of a great weekend for the Cleveland Browns, are you not?
Great is a relative term. A win's a win. The Packers lost. What's not to like, Special teams are back in the NFL.
Yeah, and not only are special teams back, but Ohio State football is back this week, and we are very much looking forward to their game against Washington on Saturday. Of course, we're going to have film study on Thursday afternoon from Mr. Kyle Jones himself to help bridge the gap between now and Saturday. We're going to get into a little bit of a teaser for this week's episode in a minute. But before we do that, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio, the official bank of 11 Warriors and the 11 Dubcast this Ohio State football season. From game day to work day, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. They are locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Give them a visit now at fbcentralohio.com. Now, Mr. Jones, I did say last week that I made the bold proclamation that no team was going to break double digits on Ohio State until they played the mighty Bielema's over at Illinois. And then the Fighting Signettis promptly put Illinois in their place over the weekend and won 63-10. So I don't know how much Illinois is truly going to be the first formidable test for this Ohio State defense this year in retrospect, especially given that there's been some interesting line movement surrounding the upcoming game for Ohio State. Now, when I initially tried to relay to the beat that the line had posted at 13.5, there was a little bit of skepticism in terms of whether that was a preseason line. It was no longer available on DraftKings at the time that I made our beat aware of it. And so we held off on reporting it. Then it showed up again on DraftKings and FanDuel. And in the case of one of them, I think actually DraftKings, it ended up being 11.5. And as of Monday evening, it has actually crashed down to around 8.5 points. So we're down nearly a full touchdown at this point in terms of the anticipated spread between Ohio State and Washington this coming weekend, which I think probably catches a lot of people by surprise, especially given some of the loftier spreads Ohio State has had of late against conference opponents. So it seems like this is going to be the first true test for Ohio State's defense this season, Texas notwithstanding. I guess first true test with a little bit of context about what we can expect from the teams not related to preseason expectations. Given so much of your film studies this year have been focusing around the defense and Matt Patricia and the different things that have kind of varied between the games that we've seen thus far, you made the theme of the upcoming episode some of the tendencies that we're beginning to be able to identify. So I'm curious, which one of those that you have looked at do you believe are going to make themselves apparent against Washington? And maybe what can we expect that hasn't necessarily made itself apparent as the Buckeyes prepare to take on the Huskies?
Yeah, it's definitely becoming clear what Matt Patricia is really trying to do with this defense and with this system now that he's in charge. And the reality is there's a lot of overlap from not just what the Patriots did, but for college fans, there's a lot of overlap with what you see in Georgia, what you see or you saw at Alabama under Saban. I think it's no surprise and no secret to everyone that, that follows the sport closely, especially from a schematic lens, that the Belichick-Saban, scheme really kind of launched itself back in Cleveland 35 years ago, right, when those two worked together. And it really came to define so much of defensive football. Now, this is not to say that Ohio State is running the same scheme as Georgia. It's not like Kirby Smart and Matt Patricia's playbooks are mirror objects. Like, no, not exactly. But there's a lot of philosophical elements in there. Some of the verbiage is the same, right? But what I mean by that specifically is you see a lot of cover three, a lot of single high safety. And that I say that because that's different from what we saw when Ohio State's defense really took off last year. And I think when you hear some people, you see a lot of the same things, right? They're like, well, they're running some man coverage, running cover 3, they're running cover 2, and all of that is true. The coverages are relatively similar. How they get there is what's different, and I think that's really interesting. And then I think the biggest change from an Ohio State historical perspective is this is not an even front team, really, when you think about it. Now, forever and a half, going back to the 80s, Ohio State was a four-man front that, through the 90s, it was a four-man front, through the 2000s, through Urban Meyer, it was a four-man front. This is a team that wants to play, and they are playing more and more odd front. So they got a nose tackle, Caden McDonald, who is just eating opposing centers for lunch, right? He's sitting right over that center, and he's living in backfields. And I say that to answer your question because I think that's going to be a real difference maker this weekend against Washington. I think we're going to see a lot of light personnel packages defensively. We've already seen a lot, right? So you have speed on the field. And I'm saying this because you've got Damon Williams, who is lightning fast. I've been trying to rack my brain. I really am having trouble coming up with the last time Ohio State played a quarterback who can move quite like him, right? They've been Arch Manning can move. There've been other quarterbacks that are big that can move. But a guy who is really just, I think a lot of people, and to your point about the line, I think a lot of people watched that game on Saturday night. It was probably the first time they've seen Damon Williams and Jonah Coleman, who are studs for Washington, right? Those are maybe the most explosive quarterback, and for my money, probably the best tailback Ohio State's going to see, at least outside of Ann Arbor or East Lance or Happy Valley, right? I mean, he might be in that conversation with those guys, right? So why I say all that is you're going to see, I think, a lot of light personnel. You're going to see a lot of defensive backs. You're going to see a lot of speed on the field, and they're going to allow K-Mac to live in the middle. They're going to rotate all the defensive ends because we've seen a lot of that where you have those defensive ends, kind of pinching and trying to break the pocket. And then I think we're going to see a lot of Arvell Reese basically spying. They call it a mirror is really what the scheme talk is because that's what you're doing is you're trying to just mirror the quarterback. And, as he moves one side or the other, you're just trying to follow in that direction and then just, be directly across from him on the opposite line of scrimmage. And that's what I think we're going to see a ton of. Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Caleb Downs. I think Jalen McLean's going to get some opportunity in there because we've seen some of that, especially on third downs when, they've tried to break the pocket and force passers out. But I think we're going to see that a lot on Saturday in Seattle.
Yeah, I think one of the things that served them most well in the rematch against Oregon last year was they did a lot of, I don't know if they did as much on early downs, but on the obvious passing downs, they did a lot of spying of Dylan Gabriel that I don't think they necessarily deployed as much in the first matchup. And I don't know if Gabriel necessarily killed them with his legs in the first matchup, but he was certainly elusive enough in the pocket. I don't think they had any sacks in that game where it was a complete flip of the script in the rematch in the Rose Bowl where they ended up finishing with something like 7 or 8 sacks. And a big part of that was deploying Cody Simon, I believe, as a spy pretty regularly. So if we do end up seeing a spy regularly, and before going back to the game, it was interesting you brought up Archie Manning because I was going to make the joke. I mean, when Archie Manning came in to relieve Quinn Ewers last year and ran for 23 miles an hour on his like 50, 60-yard touchdown run against Sam Houston State A&M or whatever in-state opponent they were playing that clearly wasn't going to be a test for that guy. I mean, everybody was pointing out, oh, he ran faster than any college quarterback this year. So it was kind of surprising whether he did it by choice or whether I wasn't sure if whether he consciously or unconsciously maybe wasn't using his legs enough as he could have against Ohio State, or whether Ohio State schemed to take that away from him. It wasn't really apparent to me on the first watch which one had happened. It felt more like he probably had more opportunities to do more with his legs and just didn't take advantage of it. Given what you said about Washington's quarterback, I wonder, who do you think is going to be best suited to play the spy role on those obvious passing downs in this game without having to take away from what they would be able to apply in coverage? Would it be someone like Arvell Reese? Would it be somebody like Caleb Downs? Who do you expect to be the guy that they designate to be the one tracking Washington's quarterback this weekend?
I think that's a great call out for what is the scenario, because I do think on the thing with Williams that you can see is, he's a threat no matter what down it is. They're going to run designed quarterback runs a la the way the Ravens use Lamar Jackson. They're going to use him in the option game, right? He and Coleman are going to, he's going to have options to give and throw too, right? And so I think on early downs, and this is something, what I went back in the bye week and I've been watching the 3 games again and trying to pay attention to some of this stuff of what's going to translate, not just to the rest of the season, but specific to this weekend. And what you've seen in a few instances is when there has been that running quarterback threat, you see the safeties on early downs mirroring and really following and paying attention. They have, the keep, if you will. That's, what you'd call it. Say like, if the linebackers are going to play the dive, the give, the handoff, essentially, if they're playing the running back, then we need somebody in the backfield, usually a safety, is going to follow and keep eyes on the quarterback in case he keeps. And I think that's what we're going to see with Downs and McClain, maybe Styles, but I think it would probably be Downs and McClain, just given their physicality and tackling ability, are most likely to be those guys kind of keeping an eye on Williams early, because those designed quarterback runs will absolutely be a part of this game plan. Like that there's no question in my mind that Ohio State's going to see that and needs to be prepared for it. But in the passing downs, as you've said, I think you're going to see that 3-down look where you have 3 defensive linemen or 3 defensive ends, even, right? Where you put Caden Curry at the nose, where he's been really effective the last couple of weeks and he's been disruptive. And then you can, rotate, take your pick of which other defensive ends are out there. And really what their job is going to be is break the pocket. You don't want him stepping up. You don't want him throwing in rhythm. When he throws in rhythm, he throws a great ball. When you force him out of that rhythm, he's just looking to run. And so I think that's what you're going to see Ohio State doing. Those ends are going to try to break the pocket. And then you're going to rely on Arvell Reese most likely, because he's played a ton of this spiral in all 3 games. They've done this regardless of the opponent, where they've had him, keeping an eye on that quarterback. He looks like he's rushing the passer, and most of the time he's actually dropping as a spy. Occasionally he comes on the blitz, and that's what makes it so effective, is the offensive line doesn't know if they have to account for him in the pressure or not. And so that's where I can expect to see a lot of number 8 mugged right up on the line of scrimmage, standing over a guard as the ball is snapped. But then his job is to drop a couple yards behind, let those defensive linemen penetrate, break the pocket, and then his job is to corral that quarterback.
Well, I look forward to seeing how what you identify on film study this week reflects itself in what Ohio State ends up doing to stop Washington's dual threat approach. To your point of trying to illustrate how the metamorphosis of Ohio State's defense has taken shape over the last 10 seasons, there was a healthy amount of years in there where dual threat quarterbacks were terrorizing this defense and this school. And that wasn't just during the Kerry Coombs era, the dark ages, if you will, of that last decade. So if we have really come full circle in terms of that metamorphosis, I would hopefully like to see it show up in terms of shutting down Washington in their own house in Ohio State's first road test of the season this Saturday. But only time will tell. I look forward to seeing how it takes shape. In any event, even if the defense ends up getting a little bit more of a turbulent experience than maybe they've had to deal with so far this season, I fully expect Ohio State's offense coming out of a strong surge in the second half against Ohio and starting to figure out the timing of the chemistry between the receivers and Julian Sayin to have a strong showing. If nothing else, it should be a very nice shootout, if not another I don't want to say dominant, given we're looking at a single digit spread at the moment, but I expect another strong, nice opening road win for Ohio State at the end of September. In any event, we look forward to watching your film study to give us some more perspective on all of that this Thursday. You can make sure that you're subscribed to the 11 Warriors YouTube channel to get that when it drops on Thursday afternoon. Probably around 12:30, I would say, is when they've usually been posting during Thursday afternoon. So make sure you're subscribed, hit the bell, like and share that video as well as this one. And we will see you then. We will also see you back tomorrow with Dan Hope for the next episode of the 11 Dubcast. Until then, Mr. Jones, thank you once again for joining me. I appreciate it. Look forward to watching your film study on Thursday. Thank you for tuning into the 11 Dubcast, and thanks to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio, the official bank of 11 Warriors this Ohio State football season. We'll see you back tomorrow morning. Take care, folks.